Welcome to another Better Conversations podcast with the founders. We are just here to have conversations on the everyday things we see and apply our youthful wisdom to share our thoughts. Paul, would you like to kick us off on this topic today?
Sure. So today our topic will be a paper that I came across. It's a paper by Peter Singer. I believe he's an economist slash philosopher. The paper is
Mm,
called Famine, Affluence, and Morality, and it was published in 1972. So I came across this on YouTube. The YouTube video, I think, was called "Why Poor People Are Morally Corrupt." I was like,
mm,
wow, okay. That's a big statement. So
yeah.
that's an interesting video. I watch it. The video's about half an hour and it explained the paper and explained the arguments against it. And when you get to the end of the video, or if you read the whole paper, what you realize is that it's a very hard paper to argue against
Mm,
in terms of why it's wrong. Now you can ignore it, which I guess most people do, but in terms of arguing against why the paper is wrong, why we are not morally corrupt, um, it's very hard. So I'll share a few points here, the main talking points. So point number one is suffering and death from lack of food, shelter, and medical care are bad. And I guess we can all agree with that. That
mm,
is morally bad. You don't want to see people dying because they don't have enough food to eat, or dying because they don't have access to medical care or vaccines and that kind of stuff. Point number two, it's in our power to prevent something bad from happening without thereby sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance, then we should be doing it. So basically, if you can donate something without it actually affecting you, then technically you should.
mm,
If it can help someone else, then you should give it. If you've got a spare £10 in your pocket and you're absolutely good, life is good, your stomach's full, got clothes on your back, if someone asks you for £10, you can see they actually need it. What's the reason for not giving it to them?
mm,
And then, so point number three, distance and nationality do not lessen our obligation. It doesn't matter whether the person who is suffering is near or far, a compatriot or from another country. So it's basically saying it doesn't matter who it is. Just because the person is your friend means you should help them, and just because the person is a stranger doesn't mean that you should let them suffer. Um, yeah, and basically this is point number three and number four kind of intertwined. So I'll explain number four first. By
mm,
donating to relief agencies, individuals can prevent suffering and death from lack of food, shelter, and medical care. This is relief agencies like Oxfam, UNICEF, the Red Cross. Um, and so when I say point three, when it comes into the distance, these are international organizations. UNICEF's an international organization. So by donating to UNICEF, you can help people all around the world. So you can't say, oh, how do I not help people in China, in Taiwan, in Kenya, in Argentina, wherever, because of
mm,
our international organizations and also because of the internet, because through the internet, you can find a organization within that country, the country that you want to help from wherever you are. From the UK, I can send money to South Africa if I want to. So then point number five is the conclusion. Therefore, those who can afford to donate to relief efforts without sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance have a moral obligation to do so.
mm.
So yes, that's the main talking points of the paper. So I want to know what are your thoughts first before I continue.
Yeah, I think firstly, I actually want to praise the paper because I think it's a nicely constructed argument. And I actually, I actually can see how if you sort of, if you reason it like the way he's reasoned it, 100% you do come out with that conclusion. So I think as a as a well constructed argument to why people should be donating more than they do, or donating anything at all if they don't. I think it's definitely a well constructed argument, and I actually do like it. I mean, like for the most part, we actually, well, here in the UK, most people that, let's say, probably go through all schooling, get a degree, most of them will actually probably be probably financially better off, and in terms of food, clothing, shelter, way better off than a lot of the population.
Yeah.
So I think we can probably all agree as well that we probably have more, which is really what his paper is. We probably have more than what we actually need. So ultimately, if someone has less than what they need, then why why should someone who has more, not give? So I do actually like the well constructed argument and the way he presents it.
Yeah, so he's basically saying, so for everyone listening, he's basically saying that he's not saying if you're struggling to pay your bills and you're
Mm,
struggling to put food on your table every day, he's not talking about people like you because you're actually still trying to make ends meet. He's
mm,
talking about when it's what he means by comparable. What's the actual phrase that I used? Comparable moral importance without
mm,
sacrificing comparable moral importance, right? So he's talking about people who want to buy a Gucci jacket for
yeah,
£600. So if you want to buy the jacket, it's like, do you already have a jacket? Yes.
yeah,
Does your jacket have holes in it? No. Is your jacket still functional? Does it keep you warm in the winter still? Yes, it does.
mm,
So then you actually don't need to buy the jacket. It's not of moral importance. You're
yeah,
not going to suffer if you don't have a jacket. So that £600 can be used to help someone else.
mm,
So
mm,
there's not like that's why he doesn't put an exact figure on it. He just calls it comparable moral importance.
yeah,
So
yeah,
once your basic necessities are met, once you have a roof over your head, a shelter, clothes on your back that are functional and don't have holes in them, and you can still present yourself well, and you have food to eat, and your lifestyle's okay.
mm,
So you might even include having a car. So yes, you have a car, you need the car to get to work,
yeah,
get to here, there, and everywhere. But is your car a £10,000 SUV, maybe even a £25,000 electric SUV to
yeah,
reduce
yeah,
emissions, to save the environment and stuff? Or is your car a Mercedes G Wagon or however much it is?
yeah, yeah,
Could I think the difference between let's say a Skoda Yeti and a G Wagon is about 150k. That's
mm,
150k that, according to Peter Singer, could have gone to assisting the poor.
yeah,
And
yeah. I think
gone,
yeah, no, no. I was going to say I think this is why I'm not sure if you've seen, but a lot of people are starting to get attracted to this minimalist sort of lifestyle, not needing to have more than what you need. Because normally, a lot of the time as well, when you have more than when you're trying to operate at a level where your lifestyle is sort of more than what you actually need, you tend to introduce way more problems into your own individual life as well. Like that G wagon, once it breaks down, you got to take it to a special, you know, manufacturer. You got, there's so many other complexities that come with trying to maintain a life that is way beyond what humans actually need to survive.
yeah. And yeah, so he's basically saying the people who would, it's hard to say, but he's basically saying if you choose to go get the G Wagon when it's unnecessary, you don't need it, you're kind of evil. Because there's
Mm,
people out there
mm,
suffering and you can help them and you're just choosing not to.
yeah,
And if you put it in a basic phrase like I just said it, ah, it's, how do you argue
yeah.
against that?
Yeah, no, no, it is hard, it is hard, and I think when you go to the pond analogy as well, if you tell the audience the
Yes,
pond analogy,
so
that yeah, because that's a good one as
the
well.
analogy he gives in the paper is so you're walking past a pond on your way to work. You're well dressed in a suit and tie, nice shoes and everything, right? You walk past the pond. There's a kid playing in the pond, and as you're walking past, you realize that the kid is drowning. Now you can save the kid, and you choose not to. So you go to work and you say to them, Oh, by the way, I was walking past this pond on the way to work, and this kid is drowning and asking for help. And they're like, "Oh my gosh, what happened? What did you do? Did you save the kid? Is the kid alive?" And you're like, "Nah, I just left it. I wasn't bothered." You, you like, you get cussed out at work. They'll be like, "Are
Yeah,
you
yeah.
mad? You might get sacked for just
Mm,
being a horrible person straight on the spot."
yeah, yeah,
Um, or another one is, "Ah, nah, I wanted to, but these are my new shoes. These are
mm,
my fresh new suit, like Armani suit." They'd be like,
yeah,
"Are you mad? A kid's life,
yeah,
some 4-year-old died because of your Armani suit. It
mm,
doesn't look good." Or
yeah,
imagine you said like, I wanted to, but I." So let's say use the proximity argument. Some people say, "Oh, it's far away, you can't help them." You're right there. Um, the other people can't swim to get in the pond, but you can. You, are you just gonna not get
yeah,
in, or are you gonna go and find help and come back to save the kid? By the time you go find someone else, the kid could be dead.
mm,
You go to work. It's like, "Oh, I wanted to save him, but I couldn't. So I wanted to go try to get some help." And they'd be like, "Oh, why couldn't you go and save a kid?" Just like, "I just want to feel it like it, or again my
yeah,
Armani suit." Um, so yeah, that's the analogy he gives in the paper. Obviously, he better explains it than I just have. But yeah, he says the principles of walking past and helping a kid that you see drowning in a water fountain or a pond nearby is the
mm,
same as helping people internationally. And for those of us who can extrapolate the principles of how they are similar, again, he's hard to argue against.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, I do think it's a well constructed argument, and we're sort of talking off this, and I think also when you consider sort of John Maynard Keynes' paper, so John Maynard Keynes was an economist, and he highlighted that humans would only have to sort of work full time, sort of 40 hours, 45 hours a week up to a certain point. And then after that, we'll see a massive drop in the amount of work that humans would have to do because of the technologies that we would have developed. And the technologies can then do things way more efficient than we can. So eventually, you know, we won't have to be sort of plowing a farm by ourselves. We would have a tractor that can do 100 times more work, basically, than what one human was doing. And he highlighted that with that same sort of thought, humans would be able to output way more food, clothing, shelter, all of these things that are basic necessities that humans need, um, at an extreme rate that would basically be able to sustain the whole of human population. He predicted the I think the number to, well, the point to do that would be sort of around the 1980s, I think.
Mm.
And interestingly enough, we're sort of in 2023, we're still working similar hours to those in the 1980s,
Or more.
and we've surpassed those numbers.
Yeah.
And it's like when you actually think about the tons of food that we waste, um, you think about the amount of clothing that we throw in the bin. You know, all of these we actually produce so much waste. You know, when you put it in, when you think about the amount of waste that you probably as an individual, you know, just you as an individual probably waste. You know, when you put that into context with John Maynard's paper as well, you think actually, as a human civilization, those who are the most fortunate, the most talented, those who have been able to go through full education, you know, those who are actually sort of at the top end of society in terms of wealth, have actually been able to produce massive amount of wealth, basically, that
Yeah.
if
And
shared
value.
correctly would, yeah, you know, would definitely eradicate, you know, a lot of the poverty and the crises that we see in the world today.
Mm. So then I guess the question, because you brought up Keynes's, right, is it
Mm.
the responsibility of the individual to distribute their resources, their excessive resources, or is it the responsibility of governments through taxation?
Yeah, and I think, and that's the thing. I think this could be a potential critique to a potential good critique. I think to his argument,
To whose argument?
because he's
To
sorry,
whose argument?
Singer's
Okay.
Singer's argument. And the main reason being is because when we look at the tax system, um, the idea of the tax system is that kind of like Robin Hood. I'm not sure if anyone, if you've come across Robin Hood before. You take from the rich to give to the poor, basically. So those who are significantly talented, those who have been able to produce mass amount of wealth for themselves, um, the government steps in and says we should distribute some of that. And I was watching the Justice series from Harvard University on YouTube recently as well. It's a really good series, by the way. If no one's watched it, so I would definitely recommend. But he was basically presenting a case for why we should tax the most talented, and he was highlighting. He used Michael Jordan as an example. Basically, Michael Jordan was obviously an extremely talented athlete and way more talented than majority of people in this world. No one could probably do what he was doing on the court,
Mm.
basically. Um, so he was able to amount to great amount of wealth. And his idea was that as an individual, if we left it to Michael Jordan to distribute his wealth fairly, he as an individual wouldn't have enough knowledge or enough knowledge, maybe not enough capacity. And also when you think of the amount of power that he has as well, with all of the wealth that he was able to generate, can we truly trust an individual with that amount of power, that amount of influence, along with his limited knowledge, to actually distribute his wealth in a fair way? And that was the question that he sort of posed to the Harvard students. They were all law students. That was the question that he posed to them in response to the critiques to tax systems, which is, you know, like because the argument was sort of should we tax the rich or should we let them distribute their wealth?
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess it's over to you on what you think of that question.
Um, I think it's a very valid question,
Mm,
but I still think it should be up to the individual because of the principles of our society. In Western societies
mm,
built on freedom and liberty and the power of choice to in let's say most things, right? And so someone if someone wants to choose to be morally corrupt, they can read Peter Singer's paper, agree with it,
mm.
and say, I don't care. I want to just keep my
Yeah,
bread, keep my money.
yeah,
Then
yeah,
that's their choice. Like unfortunately that's
mm,
their choice. But now if we're forcing them to do it and by taxing them, that's taking that choice away. And that leads to further complications in our society on the principles of how it's been built. We're not going to get into like all of
mm.
that, but as you can imagine,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
leads to further problems. And
mm,
yeah, secondly is corruption. Um, there are many countries, for example, where they do take tax. Tax is heavy. They're actually very serious about taking the tax and collecting it. But in terms of actually
yep,
redistributing it and using the taxes for the correct purposes, uh, the money goes missing. So if
mm,
the money goes missing, then it's still inefficiencies. So there's different types of
yeah,
inefficiency.
yeah,
There's the Michael Jordan inefficiency, for example, you gave. There's the inefficiency. For the example you gave, there is the Michael Jordan inefficiency of knowledge. So
yeah,
he doesn't know all the issues. He might not know how to get the money out there or how to distribute it.
mm,
Fair enough. But then if you do it through the government system, there's the inefficiency of the money might disappear. People are corrupt. They might
yeah,
take it. Where's the money gone? Pri- Prime
mm,
example. We'll come back to that. Or another one
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah,
you give to the charities and organizations. Again, the money might get
mm,
lost through bureaucracy and paying people to do their job. Ha- are charities the most efficient businesses in the world? According to
mm,
most economic theory, they're not because they're not profit driven. They don't have a need to be
yeah,
efficient. And then even with
yeah,
the charities, there might be a bit of moral corruption. I sent you
Mm.
the video this week of the Black Lives Matter
Yeah.
organizer in
Yeah.
Bristol. She's been found
Mm.
guilty of embezzlement. That's a charity that a lot of people are donating and giving
Yep.
to, but the money's been taken.
Mm.
So I think actually that's a better critique of Peter Singer. Is that yes, you can give to these charities, but
Mm.
is the money actually being used efficiently? And that's why I
Yeah.
bring the example of a lot of these sport athletes, such as Michael Jordan, or a
Mm.
lot. I know for a lot of footballers, right? Especially the South Americans and African footballers. I know like
Mm.
Messi, Suarez, Drogba. I think Samuel Eto'o and Sadio Mane. I know of these. I've heard and read of these players who they actually set up their own charities for either their
Mm.
own village or their own community back in their home countries, so that they can make sure and they can watch over that the fact that their money that they're donating gets used properly.
Yeah.
So obviously they have a really excessive amounts of wealth, so they can do that.
Mm.
And I guess maybe for the average person who has a bit of excess, the best you can do is give to the charities. But even then, when you do give to the
Yeah.
charities, it's not always £10. The £10 that you've given, how much of that £10
Mm.
actually goes towards the cause that you're donating for? We will never know. Or
Yeah.
some might be able to calculate it, but we know it's not 100%. So then, therefore,
Yeah.
that's part of the issue. I think that's a critique of Peter Singer.
Yeah.
But in terms of the Michael Jordan one, I think that's a bit of a harder one because yeah, government corruption is a
Mm.
serious thing worldwide.
Yeah. 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 I think it's interesting. The Michael Jordan one. What like I guess there's two categories of people in this as well. There's the average person who doesn't have a mass amount of wealth at all, and then there's sort of those on the peak end, like what we're talking about, like the Michael Jordans, and Sadio Mane's and stuff. Um, I guess for me, it's it's sort of I couldn't. I think potentially the individual. So in the pond analogy and so forth, I once again I think it's a beautiful argument in it. But if I'm gonna put my critique hat on, I think potentially the individual probably shouldn't be morally responsible for the societal inefficiencies. So, in a sense, if John Maynard Keynes, if we assume that his calculations are true and we are actually operating at a place where we are um, producing more than what we need, then as a group, I think as a collective, as a collective, we should be trying to distribute that effectively. And I think maybe bringing it down to the individual as a moral obligation to do that could potentially be, I guess, the wrong thing to do. I think the moral obligation on the individual is insignificant to the moral obligation of the group whose decisions, I guess, to distribute wealth in this way as we have it today in the systems that we do. I think as the groups that do this are actually the ones that should be at blame. And I think that's why I would put it on the group, because a group should be less likely to have a moral outcome that is wrong than an individual. Because if you have a group of people, there hopefully there's three or four people out of the seven, let's say, who actually are trying to be good people. Hopefully you don't have a group of seven bad
But,
people, but you could have one individual that wants to do bad,
but
and their decision could be
isn't the age old axiom you're only as strong as the weakest link?
as strong as the weakest. Yeah, if the weakest link is important in it,
How you will never know.
that's what I would say.
No, because if you have
So like
like, isn't
if
it saying if you have a
yeah,
chain and one of the links in the chain
yeah,
is weak, it doesn't
yeah,
matter if like of importance. One of the links is weak, so you add any weight to it, it just snaps.
yeah,
So I think,
yeah, yeah.
go on.
So that's the so the chain, yeah, 100%. Like obviously, all of the links are held as equal, and they all need to function equally, basically. But if for me, like if you take away from the fact that we're not actually all connected like that, then there will be weakest links in society that don't, or in a group that don't hold equal value to other members, if you know what I mean. So they don't have as much power or influence over the decision.
That's true. But I don't think you'll know sometimes until it's too late. That's why a lot
Yeah.
of people in power, let's be honest, a lot of presidents and prime ministers, they end up in power and they end up being corrupt. Because you don't see them
Mm.
acting corrupt on the way to the top. It's when they're there, then you start
Yeah,
going,
yeah.
oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the same thing can happen to charities. You might see people
Mm.
get into high positions, board of director positions. They might even be the CEO, so they don't have to be the face of the company. They could just be a board of director with a high level of influence, and
Yeah.
then bang, they have
Yeah.
influenced, yeah, the decision making.
Mm. Another point actually that the uh the professor of the justice series in Harvard, his name is Michael Sandel. He also had an interesting point that when you tax individuals, basically, you need to make sure that you're not doing it too much so that they become demotivated and don't want to strive. But you also have to do it enough so that their, I guess, their desire for power and greed and selfishness doesn't overtake them. I guess in some sense that they can still remain a moral individual. Um, and I guess that's an interesting point actually when you think about this as well, because maybe in order to produce the amount of output that we have now, like the wealth that we have in society today, that could potentially solve a lot of the crises we see, we might actually need people to the we actually might actually need people to want to live a lavish life in order to produce that output. It's kind of like a is it a necessary evil that you actually need people who want to make 100 million, 10 billion dollar companies, or want people, you need people like that
Yeah,
so that you do get this seesaw effect. So it's like if they weren't somewhat self-interested, or maybe a little bit less moral than the average human, then maybe we wouldn't, maybe those charities don't even exist because they don't get enough. There's not enough in the world to actually distribute. If you
yeah.
know what I
Well,
mean,
then
it might be a
also
necessary
that goes
evil.
back to the economic idea of like transformation, business transformation. Is
Mm,
the idea that the search for profits and higher profit margins leads to innovation, or let's say at least the
yeah.
utilization of innovation, the new technologies, to then offer the higher
Mm,
profits. Um, so like I can give two examples of like the old example, like 100 years ago. Let's say people were making clothing. Clothing was expensive to get proper clothing, but then someone invented the treadmill, the
yeah.
big spinning thing, right? You get five or six of those now. Instead of producing 10 shirts and 10 trousers a day, it's 200. Profit margins are
Mm,
soaring, but someone had to have a desire to one maybe invent it, but then someone definitely had to have the desire to implement it, and then see how the profit margin.
yeah.
So now we have the excess of clothes
Yeah.
for everyone,
Mm,
because before maybe actually we genuinely couldn't produce enough clothes per person, genuinely,
yeah.
because people
Yeah.
were out here
Yeah.
hand stitching it.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah. Yeah.
can't blame
Exactly.
it for
Yeah.
people that have clothes then maybe. But then and now another
Mm,
example, modern example is let's say like AI is replacing some people for higher profit margins.
mm,
It can do certain tasks
yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah.
And so now because of the implementation of AI, people are now finding ways to use it. And then again, that will lead to excess profits and better
Mm,
widespread utilization of some business services. It's the
yeah.
same as the clothes and the treadmill from 150 years ago in today's world. Use of new
Mm,
technology helps profits, and but someone has to have to the
yeah.
need, the want and desire to use the technology to gain the profits,
Yeah.
the excess profit.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely interesting. It's sort of like you need the expansion, I guess, of you need the expansion of society, and you need the potential to grow further,
Mm.
I guess, to then move the standard of living for everyone, in the world. Before internet was probably only accessible by, the top 2-3%, but now you've got it accessible worldwide. You've got countries, that, are still considered very poor, but they can still log on and watch a YouTube video. So I guess then the question comes: is that a result of individual action or a result of the group? And for me, it's a result of the group.
That's a
So I
to me
feel
the
like
result
the
of the
group
individual.
is, yes, it's that's it. For me, it's a result of the group think that we have to be able to innovate and then propel forward. Um, but the individual still plays an active role. You know what I mean? You can't obviously take away from the individual that he still plays an active role in ensuring ensuring that they're part of that contribution, because of course if you don't have individuals contributing, then you don't have the sum of it all.
Um,
um but yeah.
I was I was going to bring up this point actually. So in like
Mm.
classical, is it, I think it's called neoclassical economics, right? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
The role of
yeah.
government is to, how should I put it, provide services that no individual has incentive to provide, and that's what taxes are for, to
Mm.
collect the taxes and provide stuff
Yeah,
like street lamps and roads and
yeah.
a plumbing system. But that's within your country to make your country better.
Mm.
So you tax it, and then obviously, yes, to help some people who are poor and can't help themselves. People such as maybe the less abled, uh,
Yeah.
people, the elderly. That's another one. Um,
Mm.
so that's what we're taught, like what taxation is for,
Yeah.
and the role that's the role of government to correct
Mm.
some inefficiencies in the free market. Because prime
Yeah.
example is like street lamps at night. No one has an incentive to make street lamps because if you're charging a road for street lamps and someone refuses to pay, you can't stop them from using the street lamp, right? So that's why the
Mm.
government provide it as just a
Yeah.
basic good that the government provides. Um, but in terms of giving to charity worldwide, should the government be taking my tax to give to someone in another country when it should be already be helping the
Mm.
people in this country?
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why
Yeah,
that's another
I guess.
argument of like from Peter Singer, I guess,
Yeah.
incorporating into like
Yeah.
classical economics. So if I still have access
Mm.
after the government has taxed me from my company, and let's be real, tax is kind of hefty, right? So they're
Yeah.
taking my tax here to help people here in the UK.
Mm.
Now they're already inefficient with that, but that's a whole another that's a
Yeah, there's
whole
already
another
inefficiencies in that as well. I was
conversation,
gonna
right?
say, yeah.
But if I still have
Yeah.
excess, let's say excess funds, and I don't need
Mm.
anything of comparable moral importance, why should I not donate? Assuming that the charities I'm donating to are efficient and they will get my money to where it needs to go, what's my
Mm.
reason to not donate?
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I guess if we assume that that is the government's role, I guess then this is again where how far do donations actually go as well? Because if that is the government's role and these countries are, you know, what is the government doing in these countries? Of course, some of them are corrupt. Unfortunately, can't do anything about that. But does that mean that we have a repeat cycle of we're not actually solving the problem, but we're keeping people going in their current situations?
Which people?
Um, So people in those countries that maybe are less fortunate, maybe their government's corrupt and they're not stepping in the areas that they should be, or they don't have enough resources to. I guess the question
But
is how if the charities are distributing the wealth to individuals within those countries, I guess then the question comes: what is the potential for my donation to actually reap benefit in those countries, or are we still going to be seeing the same results after 200, 300 years in these countries because their governments are just not distributing wealth in a way, and our individuals just staying alive but never actually fully reaching their potential?
wait, that's a long question. Wait,
Yeah,
you can repeat the question?
yeah. So really, it comes down to: shouldn't the government in those countries be responsible for the lack of inefficiencies in
In those
you know
countries?
in their countries?
Yes,
Yeah.
but that still doesn't stop us. That's like in the pond example, that's like saying the parent is responsible for the child being in the pond, so I shouldn't help the child drowning in the pond. And so
Mm,
when I
mm,
say like that, it's like, yes, those governments are responsible, but if these charities can get my aid directly to the people who need it and provide a plate of food for one day for someone to stay alive, then am I still not doing the morally correct thing? So yeah, I think that's how the paper would
yeah.
answer it. And again, I can't see anything wrong with that. And
Yeah.
secondly, I just wanted to mention that the paper doesn't. It's not always about about other foreign governments being corrupt and the distribution of wealth being incorrect. Another thing that paper talks about is
Mm,
just like natural disasters. You can have natural disasters in other countries, and
yeah.
that's
Yeah.
nothing to
Yeah.
do with wealth and distribution. That could just be people need help in a certain time. They need to be able to
Mm,
pay for this, pay for that, electricity, food, whatever. What can I do to help them? And should you? And the answer is like,
yeah.
yes. So it's not just about, oh, because their government
Yeah.
is X, Y, and Z, we shouldn't help them. It could be a natural disaster has occurred. Like, I think the
Mm,
tsunami, like Japan is prone to tsunamis. Japanese got a very well built society. I don't think maybe we can argue against that. But
yeah.
if they
Yeah.
get hit by a tsunami or an earthquake, does that mean, oh,
Mm,
because I know their country's wealthy in this moment right now, I shouldn't help them or send
yeah.
money
Yeah.
to them? So yeah,
Yeah. 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 I think. I think the point is, I guess, the money doesn't solve all the problems. It's politics. It's philosophy. It's individuals. Culture. There's so many, I guess, factors that play into this, that I can give a child a plate of food for a child all the way to adult, let's say, because of the wealth that I generate. I could feed 100 people in those countries every day for the rest of their lives. But that's the moral thing to do. But if the end of it is, you know, they're still in poverty, they're still struggling, they've needed that support for 80 years, let's say they've managed to live to 80, they have not been able to do anything with the potential that I've given them. I guess the question is, does the end actually justify the moral act that I've done?
well, that means you just let them die.
That's a deep question though. Yeah, yeah, no, no, that's a deep question though. That is a deep that is a deep question. um I think I I think the answer is yes. I think the answer is like, you still should have done the moral act, which is,
The end justifies the
I
means.
think you
Yeah,
still
I
should have.
agree. I agree.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I still think you should have done that, but I can see how also, if we are in a cycle where we're not solving a problem, or we're not solving the problem, I can see also how the average individual, maybe I guess most of society, could turn around and say, my my contribution isn't really benefiting um the the end result,
But I would
if
say
you know what I mean.
that's with the assumption that the person you're donating to, or the country you're donating to, is, let's say, in abject poverty. And that's one of the
Yeah,
scenarios.
yeah, yeah.
But like I said, if you go back to the scenario of a
Mm,
natural disaster, if you can donate for 6 months to help someone get back on their feet, whilst they're homeless and their house has
yeah,
been destroyed, does the end justify the mean in that one? And I think the answer is just a unequivocal yes, because that's not,
yeah, yeah,
oh, I've been in poverty, this country is in abject poverty, this person is in abject poverty, and they will be in abject poverty 60 years from now. It's, I
yeah,
need
yeah.
this, the person needs help and aid right now, temporarily, for XYZ reasons, and you can provide it, and should
Mm,
you? Yes. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
the question I have
yeah. I
to round
think.
up to ask you is,
Yeah, yeah.
are people evil? Are we immoral?
Um, yeah. So I think Singer, unfortunately, I think although I think his paper is good, and I think his argument's good. I think he places too much responsibility on the individual. Um, so for me, I think people are moral based on the based on the knowledge and reason and based on the knowledge and culture and all these other things basically put all together, not just their ability to achieve a life that is maybe that goes beyond what they need. I think based on the culture that they live in and all of these other things that come into play, I think people are moral. However, I do strongly believe that what we should take away from the paper is that actually we should accept the fact that we are actually probably in a place where we're living much probably beyond what we need to live. And if there are things that we can do from an individual perspective, I think that's what we should take away from it. That we should actually probably try our best to do that without foregoing our goals, um, to still achieve a life that we would want to live. Not necessarily a life that allows us to survive. Let's
So
put it that way.
this is gonna be a weird
Yep.
question, but being do you think morality and therefore being moral is black and white, or is it subjective, or like somewhere along the scale?
Yeah, I think morality is somewhat, yeah, it's not, obviously I'm a Christian, is it? So I wouldn't actually say it is subjective from my point of view. However, I can also appreciate that actually cultures influence all of these, where you live, even weather, things like weather and stuff. They all come into play when it comes to a person's moral obligation and and what they believe to be moral. So, like for example, buying a house in the UK, most people would say that's a good thing to do. That's a good investment. We need to do that. Whereas maybe an individual who, you know, who's probably who would never even have the means to buy a house, for example, and you could even argue why couldn't we just rent for all our lives? Like why do you need to buy a house if we've got enough properties? Why do you need that wealth? Then I guess for me, it's like that person, yeah, that individual would live within the means and the obligations of which their society deems as culturally appropriate. If you mean so, if it's programmed in our mind to make sure that we buy a house and have a nice car, and that's just what our society has defined for us, then I don't think you're immoral to go against that. Let's put it that way.
So you're basically saying that on the spectrum of moral versus immoral, it depends on your environment. Okay,
Yeah,
that's an interesting topic we'll get into another day.
yeah. I think it's the group. I think the group strongly does define what we see as moral and what we see as the right thing to do, and individuals are criticized based on that rather than the individual defining it.
Hmm.
If you know what I mean? Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's been a good conversation, and I think I hope
Mm.
hopefully the viewers and the listeners have learned a lot. today about Peter Singer. I learned a
Yeah,
bit about economics.
yeah. And we'll definitely link everything down actually in the comments. No, not in the comments, in the description. That's what it say. Yeah, we'll link it in the description as well if you want to have a look at that Peter Singer paper. You want to read up more on John Maynard Keynes, or if you want to see some of the justice lectures as well. We'll link all of that down to as they are good resources as well
Yeah.
to get you thinking. Great.
Take
So
care.
we'll see you next time.